Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm very glad to see so many people joining us today. Thank you for those of you who attended our first seminar on research methods in TESOL that I was doing a couple of weeks ago. And today we're going to talk about questionnaire design, because we thought that this is the topic that some of you who are either currently doing research or are planning to do research in teacher education might be interested in the future. So we thought to choose this topic for our today's webinar. As you can see the topic on the slide. So I'm just going to tell you briefly what are the plans for today. So what we're going to do in this session. So we'll start with discussing, just having a general discussion about questionnaire. We'll talk about some advantages of questionnaire and why you would prefer to use it as a research tool. Why some people would use it as a research tool, and why these scholars are recommending to use it and in which types of research. We'll also discuss some of the possible problems that might arise with the use of questionnaire as a research instrument, especially if it's badly designed, like ill-designed type of questionnaire. So, and we'll also discuss some possible solutions. So what can be done in order to deal with those problems and how to solve those possible issues that might arise. We will also discuss some of the strategies, some specific strategies that you can use to solve various sorts of problems with designing your questionnaires. And at the end, I prepared one activity, like a task, which consists of a few questions, which I selected, different types of questionnaire items from one of the questionnaires that was developed a couple of years ago by one of our MA students on the course. And just wanted to use it as an example to discuss with you from what you've learned in the session, some strengths and weaknesses of that type of questionnaire and of items from that questionnaire, and some of your ideas on how this could be addressed. Okay, I think we can probably start now. If you have any questions while I am speaking, it's not fully as a lecture. I will be doing some discussions throughout the session, but please feel free to stop me and ask me some questions. So let's start then with the questionnaire, with the definition itself. So what is a questionnaire? As many of you might know, questionnaire is a written instrument or a tool which consists of a set of questions, or as Brown defines them, a series of questions or statements, not necessarily in the question form. Sometimes they can be expressed as statements, to which they either react by writing out their answers or choosing, like choosing the boxes, selecting the option. These could be multiple choice questions, short answer questions. So the options which they pick, or this could be Likert scale items where they would need to decide, for example, whether they strongly agree with a particular statement, agree, or the extent of agreement, whether they don't have any particular strong opinion, or whether they disagree or strongly disagree. So different types of these, and mainly which I've mentioned now, are close-ended types of questionnaire items, but there are also some open-ended questions, which also consider types of questionnaire items. Open-ended questionnaire. Usually, though, questionnaire is not fully open-ended. It consists both close-ended or only close-ended, and in addition, supplemented by open-ended questions or items. That's the definition of questionnaire by Brown. Those of you who attended our last seminar on research methods in TESOL might remember me talking about several approaches to research. And one of these approaches is a survey approach or survey research. And questionnaire is a method that is used in this type of research, in the survey research approach. Just wanted to mention that, especially if we're talking about close-ended, but sometimes when we address the open-ended types of questions as well. So as the first task, before we continue talking about the advantages of a questionnaire as a research tool, I wanted to ask you to take a couple of minutes and think about two possible advantages, any that you are aware of, and two disadvantages or two limitations of a questionnaire as a data collection instrument. If you take a few minutes to think about that, then you can write some of your answers in the chat box if you like, or then we can ask some people to volunteer and speak to the whole group. Just give you a few minutes to think. Can't see if anyone is writing any answers, or maybe people are just thinking.
Yes, yeah, we have some answers. Says great amount of respondents, no insight of the data, easy and time saving to collect, difficult to design. One of the advantages of it is that people can express their opinions in written form more openly than orally.
Okay.
Another participant says, Nazima says, it may help to organize accurate and real statistics. Nargiza says, analyze the data, evaluation of research outcomes. Iana says, limited options.
Okay. So limited options is like a strength or a weakness of it. It probably can be viewed in any way. I know some people might view it as a strength, some as a weakness. But...
Yeah.
Okay. Would anyone like to say something? Is there anyone who would like to? Oh, I don't know what's happening.
I'll turn it off now.
If there is anything that anyone would like to add, we've heard quite a few very good responses and some good examples of strengths and weaknesses. Is there anything that anyone would like to share? Maybe share your own experiences or mention some very important points that you would like to highlight. Okay, if not, we can probably move on, because there will be still opportunity for people to express their opinions.
And, let me just read one more answer. Ayas, try not to include neutral answer, as people tend to choose that in most cases, particularly in Likert scale.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so you know a lot about questionnaires and about the strengths and weaknesses of the questionnaire as a tool. So from what I've heard, like very good responses. Okay, so anyway, let us continue. On the next slide, you can see some advantages of questionnaire as highlighted by different scholars, by Anderson and Dorney. But what I would like to particularly highlight from this slide, and also to summarize something what you've already mentioned, that questionnaire, one of the obvious advantages of questionnaire as a research technique is that it's a very quick, it's a very efficient way of gathering data. But particularly of gathering, what is important to emphasize is it can gather large amount of information from a large sample of people or from a large number of participants, relatively quickly and efficiently. Also, it's a very cheap way of gathering data, because you don't have to do it face-to-face. You don't have to search for participants and go to different classrooms and distribute questionnaires there. Very often, especially nowadays, you can do it online. You can spread the questionnaire online to a group of people, and these people can continue spreading it further to the people who are likely to be potential participants, of course, considering their characteristics, considering maybe their past experiences, which might be useful to take into account when you recruit participants. But you can gather, like to highlight again, a large amount of information very quickly. And the form, as highlighted by Dorney in his definition, the form of information that questionnaire elicits is something that is readily processable, more or less readily processable, especially if these are Likert scale items, or if these are some short answer questions. If these are open questions, they can't be analyzed quantitatively. Usually with open questions, we analyze them qualitatively, and I could talk about that separately in a different session. But very often when we're talking about statistical analysis, quantitative analysis, we mean the closed-ended types of questions in the questionnaire. The other thing is that one of the obvious advantages of questionnaire is that the researcher doesn't need to be present when you are collecting data. And as I said before, so you can send it out by online, or you can do it by phone, by post. You can send large amounts of questionnaires, so not necessarily face-to-face. These are some of the advantages. And of course, it's a relatively reliable and reasonably valid type of data that can be collected with the help of questionnaire. So I also wanted to emphasize the types of data that we can collect with the help of questionnaire. So what kind of data you can actually collect. And this is the book, the source, which I will mention later on in the references, but I would like to emphasize here. And you can see the cover page of this book by Zoltan Dornay and Taguchi. The textbook is called Questionnaires in Second Language Research, Construction, Administration, and Processing. So this is a very useful tool, which if you are considering designing questionnaire and want to learn more about the types of questions and how to design items and how to administer questionnaires, please have a try to access this book and have a look at the relevant chapters. So the types of data that you can collect. The first type of data is factual. And very often we call factual type of data as classification type of questions. So why we use them? To find out who our respondents are. So with the help of factual type of questions, we usually collect some data about demographic characteristics of our participants. By demographics, I mean their age, their gender, race, maybe their socioeconomic status, their educational background. For example, you can ask questions like how many years you've been learning, you've been studying at the university, what is your experience of, for example, in a particular context. So you find out about their educational background. You might also find out about their occupation, for example, anything about their teaching experience, their language learning history, or their level of proficiency. For example, you might ask, you might just directly ask what is, according to IELTS, for example, or TOEFL, what is their level of English language proficiency in the second language. You might also ask questions like how long they have spent abroad, what is their time, how many years they have spent in English-speaking country, for instance, so which is a very common type of question which we ask. These are all factual questions. Very often you put them at the beginning of the questionnaire. As from what I've noticed in different types of questionnaires, the scholars put them at the very beginning. The factual types of questions, they can be a few. The second type is behavioral type of questions. And the word behavioral speaks for itself. Behavioral, when you're interested in behaviors or actions, lifestyles, habits of your respondents. So you might be asking about, for example, the frequency of using a particular strategy in the past, how long or how frequently they do a particular thing, or how frequently they take a particular action. So that's about their behaviors. Usually behavioral questions come after factual type of questions, but the third type, which you can see on the slide, attitudinal type of questions, when we're interested in their attitudes, but not only attitudes, also their opinions, their interests, the values that they hold, or their preferences for particular activities. So these are all attitudinal types of questions or types of data that you can collect with the help of questionnaire. So attitudinal types of questions, they're very common and they're used in most of the questionnaires, if not all, when you're asking about participants' feelings, interests, opinions about a particular phenomenon or a set of phenomena. Okay, so these are the types of data that you normally collect with the help of questionnaire. If you access this book by Zoltan Dornay and Taguchi, you can find a bit more information and some more examples on that, on the types of data. So let's move on then to the some of the problems. And why we're talking about problems? Because it's very easy to produce unreliable and ill-constructed items in the questionnaire. That's why we need to think about what to avoid and what kind of problems you might actually experience in designing your questionnaire. So the first type of problem, as you can see, is superficiality of answers. So, well, what do we mean by superficial answers? When we ask our respondents to give answers or to respond to our set of questions in the questionnaire, we often leave them to themselves. We're usually not there as researchers. We ask them to complete them either online or at their own time and then send them to us. So, and very often the participants, our respondents, they are not probing deeply. They're not going deeply into a particular issue. And they're not willing, or sometimes they don't have enough time to spend working thoroughly on each of the questions in the questionnaire. So very often the answers that we get are superficial, so just kind of on the surface and not very in-depth. The other problem can be unreliable and unmotivated respondents. I'm sure that if you have ever design a questionnaire, a distributed questionnaire to your respondents, you might have had people who are not very reliable participants, or who are not very interested, and who don't really enjoy filling out the questionnaire. And I think most people do not enjoy it, but we just feel it as a responsibility when we're taking part in somebody's study. But learners, for example, our students, if they're taking a questionnaire, they might not really enjoy from it, and they might not see any benefit from doing it, unless there is some kind of, for example, financial benefit or obvious learning benefit that you might be giving them. So they might not see it as a beneficial experience for them, or they might not realize that they might benefit from it. And that's why the quality of their answers might suffer. So they might leave out some questions completely, or sometimes they might not respond to the question as a whole. They might respond to only part of it. So either by mistake or because they just don't like to answer the questions. So the other type of problem is respondent literacy problems. Nowadays, I will have some people who raise their hand. So maybe I can stop here for a second, because I promised to collect some questions. If somebody has a question at this stage, I could see Guli, I think, raising hand. I don't know how to invite people to speak. Do I just ask?
Yeah, they can unmute themselves.
Yeah,
but maybe that's a mistake. I don't know.
Yeah, just maybe to ask if there is anything that somebody would like to ask.
Mm-hmm. Guys, any questions? Okay. I can read some of the comments that we have. Yeah, that we have several people saying that it is useful, that it's a very useful topic. Aya says, sometimes respondents may try too much to please, in the case if the respondents are your students.
Mm-hmm. To please. Sorry, maybe I didn't.
Yes, to please, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to please the person the researcher.
Yes.
So by giving the answer which doesn't actually represent their opinion, their genuine opinion, is it what is meant? Probably, yeah. Because I was, I'm going to talk about that actually. That's a very good question, because it happens quite often that this problem arises, that we try to please the researcher who is doing the questionnaire. We try to sometimes we try to, not intentionally probably, but give the response which doesn't give our genuine, which is simply viewed as socially desirable, which when we want the people to have a positive image of ourselves, and just simply because we want to look good and so on. And that's why sometimes as respondents, we might not give the answer which expresses our genuine opinion. And this is one of the limitations, one of the problems with questionnaire as well. One of the obvious problems, that we are never sure, we never know whether we're actually getting their genuine opinion, especially about attitudinal responses. It can be about factual as well. We can't check whether they're actually giving the true information, for example, about the time they spent abroad. Maybe they just want to look good and to look very professional and give us this answer. This is a problem with questionnaire. Is there anything else that anyone wants to ask, or shall we move on? Because there might be some things.
Yeah, it's just some comments saying, so therefore we have to choose more other tools to get more reliable data, right? So I guess
probably in addition, questionnaire is one,
right?
is one of the most reliable types of tools, but we try to ensure to make it even more reliable, probably by using some strategies, and supplement it with the other tools like interviews, for example. Though I don't think I mentioned this, very often interviews are, questionnaires are interviews. Questionnaire is thought of as a kind of written interview. I don't know if you've heard of this thing, but questionnaire is often viewed as a written interview. And it's very easy, if you're doing an interview in addition to a questionnaire, to simply repeat it. So what is important is to use interview as an trying to investigate an issue in more depth and trying to get more out of your respondents, rather than repeat again the same questions which are asking in your questionnaire. Okay, I think we can probably, shall we move on?
Yeah, there are just two tiny comments. Manojat says, if we want to collect data, so we need Yeah, I think that's a question, what kind of questionnaires we should prepare. Of course, you will talk about. So Niso just comments on, it happens when the teachers ask for feedback. Sometimes students try to give high marks, right? So like teacher evaluation.
Yeah, and also, yeah, then it also could be a problem. Yeah, it's like a survey which they fill in about a particular course is also considered a questionnaire. For example, we give a questionnaire about the effectiveness of a particular module or a particular course, and sometimes students might be thinking about getting a higher mark. That's why we often make everything here in Leeds, for example, and in the UK in general, we make all these types of questionnaires which are assessment type of questionnaires or feedback from the participants about a particular course or module. We try to anonymize them. We do actually anonymize them so that none of the names of the respondents and no other personal data will be identifiable. So they just can do it anonymously.
And there's a question, what do you think about questionnaire consisting exclusively of open-ended questions?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, exclusively of open-ended questions. There might be, I have never seen myself the exclusively open-ended type of questionnaire. Then it's more like an interview, I would say. So probably it's more like a written interview, really. But I think still there need to be some close-ended questions supplemented by a few open-ended. For example, asking for the reasons, asking for the further explanation or rationale for a particular decision or something of a particular action. I think it should be still combination or purely close-ended, just my opinion from what I know, and not having fully open-ended questionnaire. If you have fully open-ended, maybe do an interview instead. The other problem is you could do it with a large number of participants and do it fully open-ended, but it might be very difficult to analyze. And we'll talk about analysis at some point separately, but analyzing questionnaire data, if it's fully open-ended, might be very complicated because you're unlikely to analyze it statistically. You might, but unlikely. You are more likely to analyze it qualitatively, doing like content type of analysis, but it will take a very long time. It will be very time consuming and challenging to analyze like 60 or 70 responses, for example, open-ended responses. Okay, I think, shall we continue then?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, there are a few other points here, but I think that some of them are very obvious on the slide, the disadvantages of questionnaire. Just quickly go through them. I think I've talked about, the first two. Literacy problems, that's nowadays it's probably less common, but still there might be some people who struggle with reading and writing in the second language, especially here we're talking about L2. If we are doing a survey, a questionnaire with not with a particularly advanced level of English language proficiency learners, but for example, beginners or pre-intermediate, doing a questionnaire in English might be challenging, might be very difficult because they will have literacy problems. And what is the solution in that case? I think the obvious solution is to administer the questionnaire in the native language of the participant. And some people might be confused, might be saying that's not the best option, but we do recommend, even to our MA students who are collecting data here from their MA course mates who actually have quite high level of English language proficiency, we recommend collecting data in the first language. With interviews, definitely, and with questionnaires, if possible, as well, because they're perhaps able still to, especially if it contains some open-ended questions, to better understand the issue in the first language and to better talk about it. And then you can translate it into the L2. There are, of course, advantages of doing it in the second language, like to give them more practice, to enable them to express themselves in the target language, but there are many more advantages of doing it in the first language, especially with a bit lower level proficiency learners. So the other problem is no opportunity to correct mistakes and no opportunity to probe. I'll just talk about them together. This is another problem. We can't, unfortunately, since we're distributing the questionnaire, sending it out to people either by post or online, we're unlikely to be able to correct mistakes or to see whether the correct answer has been given or whether the wrong response has been given. And we can't really check it unless we know the person, we have personal contact with the respondent, we can get in touch and we can check it, but then we can probably check it in a different way, maybe by conducting further interview with them. but correcting mistakes in the questionnaire might be quite complicated, or probing, asking them further questions might be difficult. Self-deception, opportunity for self-deception. Here we're not talking about deceiving the researcher, but deceiving themselves, because sometimes the respondents might be unconsciously deviating kind of from the truth. So they can't give the accurate, for example, self-description. They might be describing themselves, providing information about themselves in a slightly inaccurate way. And this is called so-called self-deception, unintentional, unconscious deviation. And the other problem is fatigue or tiredness. In other words, boredom, especially if you develop a very long and monotonous type of questionnaire, for example, which consists like 40 or 50 Likert scale items or multiple choice type of questions. So the solution here is to try and reduce the number of items as much as you can. I'm not saying to make it very short, but not to make it too long. And the question might be how many items is too long, how many items is too short. There is no exact answer. It again depends on what you are investigating. This depends on your research, but maybe I would say having anything more than 30 questions in a questionnaire or 40 questions might be too long. Even 30 might be a bit too much, I would say. So trying to reduce the number of questions, trying to vary the types of questions that you ask as well. Maybe have different categories, have a few Likert scale items, have a few short answer questions, a few ranking questions, a few multiple choice, if possible. Maybe try to vary to reduce this fatigue effect. And of course, if you have, as there was a question earlier, if we have only open questions, again, this will lead to boredom and fatigue of your participants. And they will just not want to answer these long questions. So on the next slide, you can see a word of caution here, like requesting for long responses. For example, when you're asking your participants in an open question to write more than a sentence, often leads to refusal to answer the question. Or they can even drop out, they can even stop responding to the whole questionnaire. And if we get very long written answers, many of them will need to be discarded because they might be either inappropriate, they might not be complete. So then the problem will arise that some of our data might not be usable. So try to avoid requesting for very long responses from your participants. Okay, one of the very important stages in designing a questionnaire, in developing a questionnaire and distributing it out to your participants is piloting a questionnaire. I don't know if you've all heard of the word piloting. Piloting means testing, trying it out. But what do we try out? We try out various aspects. Maybe we can try out some questions from the questionnaire or the whole. Very often we try out the whole questionnaire, but we do it usually on a much smaller sample than our actual sample, intended sample of number of participants. We choose a very small sample and try it out, our questionnaire that we developed, our draft, let's say, of the questionnaire, on a small sample of participants. And what is the aim? One of the obvious aims is, of course, to identify potential problems, to see what is wrong with the questionnaire, with some particular items, and maybe come up with some possible solutions as a result of piloting. Usually piloting helps a lot, and we include it as a stage in your research. Piloting, trying out the instrument. It's with other instruments as well, not only with questionnaire. But sometimes if piloting ends up to be very effective, and if the questionnaire ended up to be a very good tool and nothing much needs to be changed, we can use even the data, our piloting data, and add it to our main data. So it could be used. For example, in my research, I was doing, I wasn't using only questionnaire, but it was one of the tools that I've used in my PhD dissertation, and which I originally was planning to be a piloting type of data, testing it out on a relatively small sample. I ended up including it as my main set of data, and then plus I collected some more data for it. Okay, let us move then to questionnaire design and what we should avoid. Another very useful source is Brown and Rogers' book, which I will include on the last slide. So they suggested a few problems or the types of mistakes that we should avoid. One of the obvious mistakes is very long items. Try to avoid making the statements or the questions very long with many options, with too many options. Also try to avoid any unclear, ambiguous items, anything that is confusing to your respondent, anything that doesn't make sense. And try to avoid these. Try to avoid also negative items, phrasing the questions in a negative way with negation. So try to make the statements more positive. Incomplete items, so anything that is incomplete, anything that the idea, for example, in the stem, in the statement itself, or in the options, or if some of the important options, for example, you include only 2 options to choose. In multiple choice, obviously, we need to include more than 2. So try to include complete elements, complete items in your questionnaire. Overlapping choices. So this is a very important one. For example, in factual questions, let's say when we're talking about the age of participants and you're asking a question, for example, how old are you? And you might be giving an option for them to choose, like 18 to 24, 24 to 30, 30 to 35. So if the participant is 24, which of the ones that they need to choose? Do they choose option 1 or option 2? So you probably need to have them mutually exclusive, kind of, rather than overlapping. So avoid having any overlapping options from 18 to 24, from 25 to 30, 31 to 35, for example. So it's just a simple example for you. Items across 2 pages, that's just about the layout of the questionnaire, but it's also important. So for example, you have the stem of the statement itself or the question at the bottom of the page and the options on the next page. Or you have 2 options on 1 page at the bottom and 2 further options on the next page. This is important to avoid as well, to make it easier for your participants to see the whole question and to be able to easily choose one of the options. Just put it all on 1 page. Double-barreled items. This is a common mistake which people make, so-called double-barreled, when we are including, adding more than 1 element into the question, addressing more than 1 issue, 2 or more issues. For example, if I give you a statement like the state should spend more money on education, especially bilingual education, and less on prisons. For instance, that was from Brown and Rogers' example from their study. So here we have a double-barreled item because we have a few elements here. In the statement, the state should spend more money on education. Then we have less money on prisons. What if the participant, for example, agrees with the first but doesn't agree with the second one? So you should avoid having these 2 statements in one and break them into 2. Here, perhaps even 3, because we said education, especially bilingual. So we're talking about education in general, and we're talking about specifically about bilingual education, and also we're talking about prisons. So again, we could view it as 2 or 3 separate questions. Loaded word items, so anything that is emotionally loaded. So try to avoid any elements, any questions which are affected by emotions. For example, if you say, undoubtedly English needs to be studied, for example, in a particular country or something. So if you're saying undoubtedly, you're kind of loading it already with or expecting your participant to agree with it, because you are emotionally loading it with your feelings, either positive or negative, in a positive or negative way. Absolute word items, so like all, every, always, never. So all these absolute words need to be excluded as much as possible. If you say, for example, all Americans are rich, or something like that. So you're using an absolute word here, all, and this is incorrect. So we can't generalize here. Leading items. So when we are pushing in a way our participant in the phrasing that we make. For example, you don't believe in grammar translation approach, do you? So if you ask this type of question, this is obviously a loaded question. We're pushing our respondents to choose a particular item, to agree with you. So try to avoid these leading type of questions. And there are a few here which you can see on the next slide, like prestige items, these which somebody mentioned earlier, like social desirability ones. When we think that something is nice, that something is good to do or prestigious, we usually provide that answer. Or we kind of tend to choose it. For example, if let's say our respondents might be thinking that it's good to read a certain number of pages, or it's important to be able to read a certain amount of books, for example. So choosing anything that is less than that number might kind of make that seem to them that it's less prestigious option, so they might be choosing the more prestigious one. So trying to exclude as much as possible those socially desirable options. Then the biased or embarrassing items, something that is embarrassing for the participants, some topics, for example, about race, or maybe something about politics, something that might be something very personal, which might be embarrassing for them to talk about. Try to avoid any biased questions in your questionnaire. For example, again, about ethnicity, about gender, religion. So trying to exclude them as much as possible. Wrong level of language. If you know that your participants are at the beginner level and giving them anything for intermediate or upper intermediate might be wrong as well. Something that you know have no knowledge to answer. For example, that you are sure that they don't have any competence in that area and you are giving them that particular questions, especially, for example, asking about their attitude, about something that you are sure they don't know about. Try to avoid these type of questions as well. And also, of course, assuming that everyone has an answer to everything, to all items, is wrong. Making respondents answer items that don't apply to them, either personally or they don't apply to their area of expertise. Anything that is not relevant at all, or anything that is a bit superfluous, contains some superfluous information, including this type of information. I mean here, giving any unnecessary or redundant information in the question, trying to include something that is not necessary. You should also avoid doing that. Okay, again, if you read Brown and Rogers, you can probably find a few more important things there, suggestions on how to design good questionnaire items. Is there anything that anyone would like to ask? I see Nigora raising hand. Nigora Haidarova. Is it just by mistake, or Nigora wants to ask something?
We have several questions. Do you want to deal with them now or later?
Yeah, I think because we're mainly I finished with the theoretical bit. It's just mainly some questions about critiquing.
All right. So, okay. If I work on the research in the field of grammar, which type of questionnaire? Okay, now I think you can see it yourself.
I'll try it because I just stopped it for a minute to see.
Yeah, which types of questionnaire can be the most suitable?
Yeah, I can see the chat now. Okay.
Nazima.
Nazima. Yeah, Nazima, I can see here. If I work on the research in the field of grammar, right here, this one, which types of questionnaire can be most suitable? Which types of questions, probably, right, in the questionnaire will be more suitable? I think if you are doing a research in grammar, is that right? So if you are doing a research about a particular aspect of grammar, you might be including, I think, different types of questions. You will definitely include, again, if you are checking their knowledge, or are you asking about their attitudes, their perceptions, for example, about different aspects of grammar. So it could be, and also, are you doing it with teachers? If you are doing it with teachers, you might be interested in their feelings, in their thoughts. Then you would definitely include some attitudinal Likert scale type of questions, for example. If you are doing a research with the students, if you want to find out about their knowledge of particular grammatical items, then you might be including, obviously, some multiple choice, where you ask them to tick the box and to choose the most, for example, appropriate response, and you're interested in factual kind of knowledge here. So it depends on what you're doing, I think. But definitely, if it's with teachers, if it's in teacher education, probably including all kinds of questions, including some open questions, attitudinal type of questions, Likert scale, which is often Likert scale type of questions, I think might be most appropriate. Okay, we have another one by Ravshan Bek. Yes, Urasmedov. Can data collected in the questionnaires be reliable? One scientist told me that data of statistics are always not correct. Okay, yeah, we can't say that they are definitely always reliable, but these are some things which, some of the things I mentioned today, which we can do to ensure their reliability. For example, one of the obvious ones is try to construct the items in a way that will be clear, understandable, comprehensible to your respondents, that they will not be biased, that they will not include any biased items, that will be very, very straightforward and clear. The instructions, I forgot to mention that at the beginning of your questionnaire, you would need to give very clear and straightforward instructions to your participants. So they need to know what they should do. Not just start, for example, with a set of questions, but explain what your study is about to make sure that you are, at least briefly, especially if you are doing it with teachers. So maybe give a couple of lines saying what is the main focus and what you're expecting them to do, how you're expecting them to answer the particular types of questions. But I think it can be made reliable if you use some of these techniques. If you read some of the literature, you should be able to find the ways to make it more reliable. Would you then advise conducting 2 surveys if there are many questions to ask to collect the data you need? In other words, splitting one question into 2. I noticed the foreign language to be an issue. You say it's always better to have it in mother tongue of your target population. Yeah, especially if you are doing it with non-native speakers. Yes, if you are doing it with, if you are doing it with lower level non-native speakers of a particular target language, I would certainly recommend doing it in the L1. If you are doing it with higher level L2 speakers, with upper intermediate, advanced, and if you feel that they are as competent in their L2 or nearly as in their L1, so probably you can do it in the L2. Sometimes I had some of my former students who really wanted to respond in English, and they felt that they know more about the particular topic in English than they do in their first language, interestingly. So you should give them perhaps the option to do it if they really want to do it in the second language. While I think it's better to do it in the first. Splitting the questionnaire into 2. Maybe not within one questionnaire have both English and Uzbek, for example, or English and Russian. But I think, studying your set of participants, your group very carefully, deciding on their level of proficiency, seeing how competent they are in the other, and then depending on that, using one or the other language, I think. Is there anything else? I think I can't see any more. Maybe I just can't go further. Are there no more questions? How reliable? Yeah, there is one more question. How reliable are the questionnaires designed in the field of linguistics or philological sciences? Again, I think it depends on who designs them. If somebody who has some experience in questionnaire design, they are very reliable. And if you are adapting questionnaires, adapting and adopting them from the literature, for example, let's say if you're developing a questionnaire on language learning motivation, Zoltan Dörne himself has plenty of, if you Google for Zoltan Dörne, he has a whole website with different types of questionnaire addressing different aspects of language learning motivation. I think you are allowed, and actually I would encourage you to adapt questionnaire from existing literature rather than design something yourself. If there is something in your area, if you are designing something completely novel, which nobody has done, or nobody has done it in the way that you would prefer to do it, so probably design your own. But you would need to read a bit more on the questionnaire design, read some more literature, follow their guidelines, which scholars recommend, and then you will be able to design a reliable questionnaire. But I think, yes, there are plenty of linguists who develop very good questionnaires which can be used with the participants safely. And yeah, okay. Is there anything else? I think can't find any more questions. Is there anything else? If not, there are. If you can see on the slide, I'm going to move back to the slide in a minute. So we'll not go through all of them, I think, but there are some questions which I might either put them, or maybe, Mr. Dira, you could share them with others, the rest of the questions. There are, I think, about 8 items there, which, and it will take time to discuss all of them. We'll probably look at 1 or 2, just as an example of critiquing, and then the rest people can look at them at their own time and maybe send me either on chat on Facebook, or maybe here, maybe send me some of their ideas on the analysis of these types of questions. Let me just share the screen, try to share the screen again. Yeah, is it sharing now? Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so this was the whole questionnaire, as I mentioned earlier, designed by one of our MA students. The title was "What are teachers' reported practices in peer observation?" So it was in teacher education area. So there were some items, I'll show you a couple on the next slide, some items which the student has developed, and I just would like to ask your opinion, what you think about them. Are they good items, or do you think there is something that might need to be improved about any of them? So for example, if you look at these two items on one slide, the first item, first of all, what type of question is it? Is it the factual, attitudinal, or behavioral type of questions? Would anyone like to say what type of question is it? Or maybe write the answer. When you're asking about the age and asking about the experience. So this is obviously a factual type of question, right? So you're not asking about their opinion here, about their attitude to age or to experience. You're asking what is their age and what is their level of experience. So if you think about these two, would anyone like to speak up? Maybe because I think it will take some time it will take time to write the answers. Would anyone like to say if you notice any problem with the first item, if there is any problem at all? And what could be done to make it a stronger, like a more reliable item? So the question, the student put it like that: age, young, tick the box, I assume, maybe, or it's not very clear here.
Hello.
Yeah, hello. Hello, Nargisa.
Hello, Mrs. Diana, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yes, it's really interesting. And I would like to mention about the factual, the type of the questionnaires. Here, I can consider it as a factual because there is written young and old. For instance, if someone asks me about my age, I wouldn't consider myself as old. Even for instance, I am 60 years old, for instance.
Yes.
That's why this is some kind of confusing, in my opinion, because maybe your MA student can change the adjectives here, maybe.
Okay, absolutely. That's a very good point, Nargisa. Thank you. So that's good, well spotted. So then, if you think about it, as Nargisa mentioned, so if you can't view it as a factual question, so what do we mean by young? What do we mean by old? And where is this borderline? So where does the young finish and the old start? So it's not very clear. So what would be the better way of phrasing it? And how do you think it could be Nargisa or someone else who would like to say, how could you phrase it in a better way? And what kind of options you could give to your participants if you want to give the options? How could you make it into a more factual question? You could probably ask, right? Something, not just put age, colon, but you could ask a simple question. Yeah, what could be the question here? You could say, how old are you, simply, right? And then you could ask them, you could give them the options, for example, the boxes, which would give the range of ages, which would not necessarily ask them to write their exact age, because some people might be a bit embarrassed, for example. I don't know, I'm not, but some people might be embarrassed to write their exact age. So, that's why it's good to give the options. For example, 20 to 24, 25 to 29, 30 to 34, 35, and so on. You know which group of respondents you have, more or less. If you have anything, for example, if you have a random couple of people who are, let's say, in their 50s or in their 60s, while most of your students, for example, younger than that, you might still say 40 plus or 50 plus, for instance, and then the rest of them might be ticking that box. But giving them the option rather than giving that confusing, ambiguous question. I agree with what Nargisa has just said. About the second one, are you experienced or inexperienced? Is it a good question? Again, similar to the first one, what do we mean, right, when we say experienced? How could you phrase it? Would anyone like to try and phrase it in a better way?
Hello, Mrs. Diana.
Hello, Zainab.
How are you?
You again? Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Yes. So I just wanted to make an option as the Nargiza talked, the second one also giving the year options. For example, your experienced year, starting from giving the options of the years again. Maybe 4 options, 5 options, starting from the indicating the year of the experience. This is better one. Just choosing the dilemma one, not the exact one, maybe the dilemma one.
Okay, so giving them the boxes
also,
again.
hello, Zainab.
Yeah, Nargiza.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Nargiza?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, Zainab.
Oh,
yes.
Nargiza, I'm listening.
I absolutely agree with the opinions of Zainab. Very nice to meet you here.
Yes.
I absolutely agree with the options that Zainab gave. Here, the questionnaire designer should identify exactly, for instance, the year of experience of the respondents. It would be more clear.
And also, in order to update the years of, for example, how the questionnaire taken place, when and whether to identify is it up to date or out of date, maybe giving the years. For example, years of experience, maybe starting from 2010 till 2020, something like this. Okay. Not exactly the years. This is also one good option, I think.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I like both options actually, both ways of looking at it. But the other thing is, there is one important thing, I don't know if anyone has noticed it, about the question itself. Do you think the question is not a bit vague in itself? Are you experienced? So yes, experienced in what?
Or rude even, I can say.
Yeah, and also, are you experienced in what? What are you experienced English language teacher? Are you experienced EAP teacher maybe?
Yeah.
So you need to be a bit more explicit here.
Too general. The questions are too general, not too specific.
Yeah, it's too general. It's too vague, I think, and also it needs to be much more precise. And of course, phrasing, as you both said, is a bit rude in a way. Are you experienced or not? So yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Anna.
Okay, and let's look at one more, and I think we can then probably stop, and then maybe a couple of, if somebody has any questions you could ask. Let's look at one more question. If you look at this one, what do you pay attention to during your observation? And there are plenty of options given here. So do you see any problem? Or maybe you think it's a good item. If you do, that's fine.
Hello.
Hello, yes, Shahistahon?
I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I think I can hear you.
Yeah, now here. Now hearing.
Yes, yes, I can hear you now. Yeah, do you think it's a good question and options?
Yes.
Holly, is there anything that could be improved in it at all, you think? If there is anything, in your opinion?
Mrs. Diana?
Yes, Nargisa?
Here is, in the list of the options, there is given classroom interaction. Does it mean the students' interaction as well, or the interaction overall, I mean, by the students and the teachers?
Okay, I actually didn't pay attention to it, but that's a very good point. Yeah, I think they probably mean both teacher-student and student-student.
Oh, in this case, I think there should be mentioned, there should be included a students' interaction might be, maybe student-centered. I want to say about the students, I mean the action here. One more option, as an option here should be included.
Okay.
Student-centered or like this.
Okay, that's a good point, yes. How about the first one, for example, the first option that comes in, the whole lesson. So the whole lesson, does the whole lesson include the other options, or is it a separate option? So for me, for example, it was a bit confusing when I saw this option. The whole lesson, does it contain the classroom setting, the methodology, the materials, or does it include only, what do we mean here by the whole lesson? Or the procedure only? So it's not very clear to me. So perhaps it could be one of the last items, or the one before the last, which says all of the above, for example, or everything. So including the setting, the materials, interaction between students.
Learning objectives and management. Yes, this is too general, I think. The option is too general, the first one.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think so as well. Because we have, for example, the last option, nothing if the lesson is boring, but we don't have everything, like including all these components. So which could be perhaps the last option. And this is only the, one more thing to point out about this particular item. It's only organizational kind of visual, but still, when you are choosing the options, so perhaps rather than putting bullet points or putting little like hyphens at the beginning, perhaps better to give options like ABC, for example, or probably be numbers or options or something. So it will be easier for them to choose either to tick or to circle. And of course, perhaps they've already mentioned this, but I don't think it was at the beginning of the whole questionnaire, what they need to do here. Do they need to choose one only, or can they choose more than one option here? What do you pay attention to? You should be very specific in the instructions. You are allowed to choose as many options as apply, or you can choose the most important thing that you pay attention to. Then the question should be rephrased. What is the most important thing that you pay attention to in your observation? Maybe the most, like a rank, maybe you could ask them to rank. That could be another way of changing the question. The most important, for example, is the methodology, then materials, interaction. I know it's difficult to rank it, but if you decided to have this type of question. Anyway, we won't be able to go through the rest of the questions, unfortunately, but I think I can put them, some more questions online and give you the options to look through them. But I just wanted to share some useful references with you on this slide, which you can see now. There are a few sources which I would like to recommend. One is by Anderson, Fundamentals of Educational Research. The source by Brown, which we looked at today, Brown and Rogers and Brown. Then Zoltan Dorney's book on research methods in applied linguistics is a very good source. And if you are designing your own questionnaire, the source by Dorney and Taguchi, the one which I've mentioned earlier on today, the cover of which I showed you earlier, the essential source if you are developing your own questionnaire. And there is one more here by Ilham, Developing a Questionnaire, especially chapter 3 on questionnaire design. These are just some sources which I thought some of you might want to know about and look into. Of course, they might find some journal articles which might be interesting and useful to read about questionnaire design. But these books, though they seem to be a bit outdated, like some of them are more than 10 years old, but they're still very much useful and used by scholars to develop questionnaires. Okay, I think there are a couple of questions. Perhaps before we finish, some people wanted to ask a few questions. Let me just turn off for now, the slide share to be able to see. Yes. No, I think some people were just giving their answers about the questions which we looked at earlier. Okay, is there anything that anyone would like to ask? Anything else? Dorney, yes, how to design and analyze surveys in second language acquisition research. Yes, absolutely. I think Zoltan Dorney has a few books co-authored with other scholars where he talks about questionnaire design, because about surveys and questionnaires, that's one of his main areas. Definitely, all the sources by Dorney are good to look at. Okay, is there anything else? I can see some people started leaving because I think we're over the time a bit, but is there anything that anyone else would like to clarify or to ask? Of course,
Mrs. Diana.
Questions, yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, who is that? Nargisa.
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Yes, Mrs. Diana. I would like to ask about your first experience in designing your first questionnaire, for instance, yes, on the way of defending your PhD in applied linguistics, right?
Yes.
And yes, what kind of difficulties did you face when firstly design your questionnaires or survey research? Can you share your...
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you for this question. I think, like all other scholars. I still can't say that I'm experienced in designing questionnaires. I'm learning myself. I'm reading the literature and learning to do it. But the first time when I designed, probably I had a few more problems that I'm having now because, for example, I wasn't quite aware of how to develop the items. I wasn't sure. For example, I didn't know that what kind of questions we need to avoid when we develop questionnaires. For example, I might have probably included some questions which might be a bit sensitive. I'm not sure, but probably I did. But then I learned about it later. Or maybe something which, the questions which were a bit leading questions, I remember that I didn't know about this. So I might have included a few of these. But also I remember I had a few of, when I was designing questions, I included sometimes more than one questions within one. That's what I mentioned earlier, so-called double-barreled questions. And now I definitely know that that's not a good idea. You need to read your question very carefully and decide whether it contains more than one element, and then where possible, break it into separate sub-questions, so-called. Yeah, so I think all these problems. I also wasn't sure whether we need to do it in the participants' language, which language we need to design these surveys. I remember some of my participants were of lower intermediate level of English language proficiency, and I was thinking of developing a questionnaire in English fully, and then my supervisor suggested that I should do it in participants L1, kind of to construct the questionnaire in participants' first language. Yeah, so these were some of the problems which I faced.
Miss Diana, can I do my addition?
Yeah, yes, please.
So I participated your questionnaire. I don't remember whether it was for your PhDs or DAs. I did this questionnaire. If you remember, you announced it one. I mean.
Yeah. It was it for the survey for the teachers of AP? Yeah.
Yeah, and there were some questions about the writing, but it was very good. By answering for those questions, we could also check our writing skill. It was very good. There are some questions to evaluate our level of writing specifically, and there were options are really specific. And also it was challenged us to improve which side of writing skill we should do. It was excellent, actually. I do remember still I did it with Mukhaya also. Mukhaya announced it, you know, Mukhaya Zaripova.
Yes.
She's my classmate, and we did it together. She sent me, and all the IELTS students did it, I guess.
Yeah, I think there were about over 100 teachers of English and teachers of EAP in particular participated in this survey. It was about 3 years ago, I think. Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago. I don't know exact year.
Yes, it was about reading and writing experiences in academic context.
The questions related, reading.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for your feedback, Zainab. Yeah, thanks. And thank you for taking part in it, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay. I think probably there are no more.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Diana. The webinar was really productive.
Thank
you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the questions as well and for sharing your opinions.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree with the idea that the researchers should put the appropriate question firstly, because this is a really tough job, because in order to put the appropriate question, you have to be aware of the background knowledge of this sphere. That's why this is very essential and crucial part of designing the questionnaires, and also to choose the options, because I want to also share with some experience with me. Nowadays, I'm trying to conduct my PhD in linguistics, but differing from the applied linguistics. Firstly, I think that they are too close. Yes, they are too close, but they are too different as well at the same time. That's why to design some kind of questionnaires and surveys in linguistics, this is a little bit time-consuming and really depends on the background structure of the language itself. That's why this webinar was really productive and useful for me, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, to conducting and having such kind of cooperation works in the future, in the very near future with you, I hope and believe.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If anyone would like, I don't know, we'll talk about this with Ms. Nadira and with other colleagues. So if you're interested in learning more about how to analyze the questionnaire data, so we could do, let's sometime in the future, the webinar about it, because today we talked about the design principles, basically. We didn't talk about statistical analysis so much. But I don't know how much we can cover within an hour, but we'll try to cover the basic principles perhaps at some point. Thank you everyone for joining.
Would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. Yeah, it was really productive. Yes, I got some feedback. People found it really useful and they really appreciate your help and advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. It was nice to talk to you all.
Thank you very much for useful information.